Imagine you've ordered something small online from overseas, maybe a gadget, some unique spice, I don't know, a little gift. It often arrives pretty quickly, right? No extra fuss at the door, no surprise customs fees. Feels almost seamless. But that smoothness is often thanks to a specific trade rule. And what happens when that very rule, designed for efficiency, might accidentally, open a door for something really harmful, like synthetic opioids. That's pretty much what we're getting into today. We're going to unpack a specific document, an executive order from the U.S. government. It might look dense at first glance, but it's actually a really important amendment. It deals with trade, import taxes, duties, and this huge challenge of the synthetic opioid supply chain, specifically from the People's Republic of China. It's a fascinating case study, really, and how these small technical policy tweaks can have potentially massive impacts on public health and even global trade itself.
Exactly. And our goal here is really to cut through the jargon, the official language. We want to get right to the heart of what this particular amendment actually changes, why the government felt it was necessary, and how it fits into the bigger picture. How governments try to tackle these really complex, serious crises using the tools they have. We'll break down the key terms so it all makes sense.
Yeah, because this isn't just some obscure rule change buried in a government document. It's about how nations use things like trade policy to respond to very real, very dangerous threats. It gives us a glimpse into how global trade rules are constantly being adjusted and how that can affect everything from international relations down to, well, the safety of our own communities. Okay, so let's start with the source itself. Where does something like this officially appear? We're looking at something published in the Federal Register. For anyone who follows government stuff, you'll know this is basically the official daily newspaper of the U.S. government. Rules, notices, presidential actions, if it's official, it lands here.
That's right. It's the official public record. And the specific item is Executive Order 14200. Now, an executive order, or EO, is essentially a directive from the president. It manages how the federal government operates. This one was signed by President Donald J. Trump back on February 5, 2025, and then published in the Register just a few days later, February 11th. And it's important to remember, these aren't just suggestions. They have real legal weight. Their authority comes from existing laws, like the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, and the National Emergencies Act. These give the president power to act, especially in, emergencies.
Okay, so it's got legal backing. And you mentioned this specific order, 14200, is an amendment. It changes something that came before it.
Precisely. It amends an earlier executive order, one issued just days before on February 1st, 2025. That first one was titled, Imposing Duties to Address the Synthetic Opioid Supply Chain in the People's Republic of China. So that sets the stage. The original goal was already about using duties, import taxes to tackle this specific problem.
Right. And when we talk about imposing duties in this context against a supply chain for something illicit, like synthetic opioids, how does that work? What's the strategy?
It's a really interesting use of economic tools for a public health and security crisis. Duties, as you said, are taxes on imported goods. Here, the government isn't primarily trying to raise money. Instead, they're using these taxes strategically. The idea is to make it significantly more expensive and therefore less attractive, less profitable, to import the specific chemicals and materials needed to make synthetic opioids like fentanyl. By increasing the cost, they hope to discourage and disrupt the flow of these dangerous substances, particularly targeting the supply chain elements originating in the PRC. It's economic pressure aimed at a deadly trade.
Okay, that makes sense. Using cost as a barrier. So the original order imposed these duties, but this amendment, EO 14200, focuses on a specific wrinkle in how duties are applied, right? Something called de minimis treatment.
Exactly, de minimis. It sounds technical, but it's actually something most of us experience, maybe without knowing the name. There's a U.S. law, 19 U.S.C. 1321, that establishes this principle. In simple terms, it allows shipments below a certain value threshold, low-value shipments, to enter the U.S. without having to pay duties or taxes, and often with less paperwork.
Okay, so that explains why when I order, say, a $20 gadget or maybe some craft supplies from an online store overseas, it just shows up. No extra bill for customs?
That's precisely de minimis in action. The threshold value has changed over the years, but the principle is the same. It's designed for efficiency. Imagine customs officers having to inspect and calculate tax on every single tiny package coming into the country, millions of them every day.
Yeah, it would be chaos. Global shipping would grind to a halt.
It really would. So de minimis speeds things up tremendously for legitimate e-commerce and small shipments. It reduces the administrative burden massively. However, and this is the crucial point leading to the amendment, This efficiency mechanism, while great for normal trade, can unintentionally create a gap, a potential loophole, if you will.
A loophole, how?
Well, if the goal is to impose duties on all goods related to a specific problematic supply chain like these opioid precursors, regardless of their shipment value, then the de minimis rule, which lets low-value shipments bypass duties, directly undermines that goal. Someone could potentially try to avoid the duties by simply sending the targeted items in lots of small, low-value packages that fall under the de minimis threshold.
Got it. So the very rule designed to help legitimate small trade could be exploited to get around the duties meant to stop dangerous goods.
That's the concern, yes.
And that brings us squarely to this amendment, Executive Order 14200. Its title is pretty direct. Amendment to Duties Addressing the Synthetic Opioid Supply Chain. So what exactly does it change about that earlier order?
It specifically targets and replaces one part of the original order, subsection G of Section 2. And what the new text does is essentially this. It says that for the covered articles, that's the term for those specific opioid-related chemicals and items targeted by the duties. If those articles would normally qualify for duty-free de minimis treatment because their value is low, that treatment will cease to be available.
Okay, so no more free pass for these specific dangerous goods, even if they're shipped in small, low-value amounts. The duty will apply regardless of the value.
That's the intent. But there's a really important condition attached. It's not like flipping a switch overnight. The amendment states this cessation of de minimis treatment happens only upon notification by the Secretary of Commerce to the President that adequate systems are in place to fully and expediently process and collect tariff revenue applicable for these items.
Oh, okay. So adequate systems. That sounds like the practical part. The government is saying, we will close this loophole, but first we need to make sure we can actually handle collecting the tax on all these potentially small shipments effectively.
Precisely. It acknowledges the operational challenge. Collecting duties on potentially millions of small packages is different from collecting them on large freight shipments. You need the IT systems, the customs procedures, the personnel. Everything has to be ready to manage that increased workload without completely clogging up the ports. So it shows they identified the de minimis pathway as a vulnerability in their strategy, and they're signaling, we're building the capacity to plug this gap. Once we're ready, this door closes. It's about ensuring the policy isn't just symbolic, but actually effective across the board.
That makes a lot of sense. It's planning ahead for the real-world execution. So, stepping back, what does this amendment really mean in terms of policy and maybe for us? The immediate impact seems clear. It's tightening the screws, making the effort to disrupt the opioid supply chain more comprehensive, closing a potential way around the duties.
Absolutely. It aims for a more watertight strategy. No leaks, so to speak, even through the small stuff. It prevents the policy from being undermined by simply breaking down shipments.
And looking broader, what does this tell us about how trade policy works?
Well, it shows that trade rules aren't set in stone. They can be and are adapted to address specific urgent national priorities, in this case, a major public health crisis with national security implications. The system has flexibility, even if it seems complex. And for you, the listener, even if you're not directly involved in importing chemicals, it highlights this deep connection between global events, government actions, and the rules governing the flow of goods. Changes like this, even narrowly targeted ones, signal how governments are willing to adjust trade norms to tackle serious problems, and that could eventually have ripple effects, maybe affecting costs or availability of other things down the line.
Yeah, it demonstrates a certain agility, adapting existing tools for new challenges.
Definitely. And that adequate systems clause really drives home the challenge of implementation. It's easy to write a rule, much harder to build the complex machinery, the customs infrastructure, the data systems to enforce it effectively across millions of transactions globally. So while this amendment focuses very specifically on opioid precursors from one country, it serves as a really potent example of this broader dynamic. How do you balance the need for efficient global trade, which de minimis supports, with the need to control or tax specific goods for safety or security reasons? It shows the government is trying hard to seal every crack, even if it means rethinking long-standing practices that usually make trade smoother for everyone else.
So to recap our deep dive today, we looked at an executive order, EO 14200. At its core, it's a targeted fix to U.S. trade policy. It's designed to make sure that the effort to impose duties on the synthetic opioid supply chain from China isn't weakened by the de minimis exception for low-value shipments. But crucially, it's set to happen only once the systems are ready to handle it. It's policy meeting practicality.
Exactly. It's a calculated move to ensure effectiveness. And perhaps this leaves us with a final thought to consider. Think about how much global trade has changed, especially with e-commerce booming. These traditional rules, like de minimis, were created in a different era. As governments everywhere grapple with controlling all sorts of things moving across borders, not just opioids, but maybe counterfeit goods, security risks, or even just collecting fair taxes, how might we see them continue to adjust or even rethink these long-standing trade facilitation rules? We might see more targeted exceptions like this one, or maybe broader reforms. It's this ongoing tension, this dance between keeping trade flowing efficiently and asserting necessary control. That's something that's likely to keep evolving.
Constant balancing act. That's a great point to end on. Thank you for joining us for this exploration into the details of policy and how they connect to some really big global challenges. We hope it gave you a clearer picture of how these things work.